Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Simon Says with me, Simon Gotzen. I would love to show you a Born of the Gods draft right now, but it's not out on Magic Online, which is kind of sad because I would love to prepare for the Pro Tour that way. But I have given the set a few thoughts already. However, I also still enjoy drafting Theros, and I'm going to show you another Theros draft. I know there's alternatives, there's always some fun queues going on before a set release, but to be honest, I always find it the most interesting to try to understand a format, a current format fully, rather than going back to an old format or drafting cube. So that's just something I prefer to do. Now, I wanted to talk about colors today, especially about gold cards, multicolored cards, and I noticed something that's really interesting, which is that Theros in itself is not a multicolored set. It's not a monocolored set either, because there are some gold cards, some multicolored cards, but with Devotion being one of the key mechanics of the block, and most of the cards being single colored, it's definitely not a set in which colorful creatures are abundant. And the colors of cards are super important during drafting, because just by their very nature, a single colored card is always going to be on the lower end of the power level spectrum, but on the better side of the risk-reward spectrum when it comes to the question, am I going to be able to play that card or not? On the other hand, a gold card offers more utility, a higher payoff, but you're risking that you might not end up in the right colors. So, especially during these first few picks of Theros and soon to be Born of the Gods, the question of whether to pick a single colored card or a multicolored card is not only interesting, but it can completely change the draft dynamics. So let's take a look at Theros, because that's what we've all been drafting and know by now. There is quite a few multicolored cards in this set, and just looking at the commons, there's a 10 card cycle, the uncommons, there's a 10 card cycle, and the rares, there's another 10 card cycle. One card for each two color combination. Now, these commons are single colored, but they all have an off color activation, so in a sense you only get their full value when you draft them in a two colored deck with the right mana. We know that Theros is an aggressive tempo oriented format, so this usually isn't the time to draft dirtly decks with 3 or 4 colors, maybe go 5 color green. It is possible, but it's definitely not the norm. So barring some weird circumstances or maybe some 5 colored mana sources, you usually won't be able to activate these cards if you don't have the appropriate color. Now, for the true gold cards, you definitely need both of the colors to cast them. Now, what I find very, very interesting, and it was a big question at the beginning of drafting Theros, is how to evaluate a card like Battlewise Hoplite, a card like Shipwreck Singer, compared to single-colored cards of similar power level. So the big question I remember was, how good is Battlewise Hoplite? It is a very strong heroic card that can come down on turn 2, but you need a plains and an island to cast it. So how does it stack up against Ringsteed Rider? How likely are you going to end up in blue-white heroic as opposed to white-red heroic or maybe some other heroic strategy? I mean, there are green heroic cards also. So this is just one example, and all of these cards, in a sense, ask the same question. However, of course, some of them are a lot more relevant. For example, Duxos is a very nice card for blue-white decks. Police Crusher is very nice for red-green. Fleece Mainline is very nice for green-white. On the other hand, Timurid the Murder King doesn't usually cut it. Steam Augury is only so-so. And if we go to the commons and uncommons, we can see a lot of cards that usually don't really influence our drafting decisions early on. So I think it's fair to say that most of these cards are pretty much irrelevant during the first few picks. Ghost and Chimera is solid, and some of these cards are definitely playable, but none of them make me exciting to play the corresponding 2-color combination. Agent of Horizons is quite solid, and the unblockability turned out to be really valuable in Theros, so definitely a nice addition to a blue-green deck. Scholar of Athreos is a card that helped Tom Martell win the last GP, so even though it's just a 3-mana 1/4, having the ability to make your opponent lose 1 and gain 1 can just close out games surprisingly quickly. And then there's Return Phalanx, as you know, one of my favorite cards, which turned out to just be a very solid black control card. And if you have the blue mana, you actually get a Hill Giant out of the deal. So Return Phalanx, definitely a sweet card. I just like the whole card. It's a really nice package. Going to the uncommons, there was basically the same thing. A Crone Hoplite is only so-so. A Spellhard Chimera rarely made any decks. But when you look at Horizon Chimera, Farika's Mender, Shipwreck Singer, and Battlewise Hoplite, those cards were really good in the corresponding decks. I rarely saw Minotaur decks, but if there were any, then Kragma Warcaller was very good. And even Destructive Revelry, Chronicler of Heroes, and Sentry of the Underworld are nothing to scoff at. So what happens in Theros is that you will maybe open a pack with a gold card, and you have to immediately decide, do you want to take this card given the risk that you might not be able to play it, or given the price that a 3-color deck would put on your consistency? Or do you go for a single-colored card? Do you take a Nastiness if there's a Police Crusher in the pack? Do you take Ringsteed Rider if there's a Battlewise Hoplite in the pack? And so on and so on. Same goes with Horizon Chimera, for example. Do you take a solid blue card over the Chimera simply because you are that much less likely to go into blue-green? Now, when you think about it that way, once you start drafting cards of one color, you can basically just choose to play that color as long as you don't pick cards of 2 other colors that are better. However, if you take Horizon Chimera, from then on, you can only take blue or green cards, otherwise you are immediately diluting your deck. So the choices you can make, if you want to be playing a gold card, are a lot more restricted than if you start off with single-colored cards. And for me personally, Theros has shown how much of a price it is to start drafting gold cards in a more or less single-colored set. Alright, that doesn't mean that the power isn't there, it just means that there is a price, and there is always a price in Magic, which is a great thing, but it does mean that especially drafting is quite complicated. So, one of the gods is coming up, and there's a mythic rare cycle of gods. I think we'll all try to first pick them just to try them out, maybe get the devotion count high enough to activate them. They all have solid abilities, maybe not the most amazing for limited, but yeah, I don't really want to talk about the gods and the mythic rares because they will rarely impact our decisions in a meaningful way during drafting. However, there are quite a few gold cards in Born of the Gods as well. However, there are a lot less than the 30 we saw here, which is quite a lot. 10 commons, 10 uncommons, and the rare cycle. So, not quite the monocolored format that you would think. So, going to the Born of the Gods cards, there is an incomplete cycle of enemy-colored activated ability creatures, and there is a true allied-colored cycle. Now, for the allied-colored cycle, the same thing holds that has been true for the Theros cards. Reborn is Sown and Fanatic of Xenagos, for example, are really strong in a green-white or red-green deck. I can see Siren of the Silent Song and Theros Enlightenment being quite valuable in their respective colors, and of course Ragemonger, if you draft the Minotaurs, go for it. But do you really want to start off with a strong card that's already in 2 colors? Or are you giving up too much by doing so? Now, Reap What Is Sown looks absolutely amazing if you can target 2 or 3 creatures of yours and they have heroic triggers, inspired triggers, you win the combat step. However, how big is the price of going for a green-white card early on in the pack? Because trust me, you won't really see that card later on. Do you want your opponents to have it, or do you want to have it yourself? And how married are you to your first pick? To which degree are you married to your first pick? Do you just stick to green and white after picking the Reap What Is Sown, or do you say, well, if it happens, but otherwise I'm just going to be free in my decisions how to continue my draft? It's a difficult decision, and I can't answer it right now, but it's something that drafting itself is going to show us. Now, the one thing I find even more interesting is the cycle of enemy-colored activation creatures, and somehow blue didn't get one. There is no blue uncommon with a green activation cost, at least I didn't find one. However, there is Kira's Follower, which I don't think is too exciting. I mean, it's pretty clear what it does. You can use it to untap a creature, giving it pseudo-vigilance, and it's instant speed, so it's definitely more than playable in Limited. It's just nothing to get too excited about. And most of these creatures are nothing to get too excited about if you don't have the mana available. For example, a 2/2 haste for 3 is quite bad. However, if you get to scry as many times as you want for a colors and a blue, that's pretty powerful in the late game. Same goes for a Crone Phalanx. 4 mana 3/3 Vigilance is already a very solid body, already a solid uncommon, I would say. But if you have red mana, you get the ability that's originally on Perforos, God of the Forge. So yeah, I kind of like that card, but I can't really see myself taking this truly early, simply because I won't know if I'm going to be able to have the red mana to activate this. Now, the two most interesting cards, I'm saving the best for last here, to me are Ordunus River Trawler and Grave Robber Spider. The Trawler always returns an enchantment creature, so basically a bestow creature from your graveyard to your hand, and that's already quite the value. And if you happen to have a white mana, you can do it again, which I think is pretty good value. There's some self-mill synergies with that, and sometimes you will just be able to generate the white mana of an Alias Presence or some other way, and then this is quite the powerful late game card. Just imagine getting this back from the graveyard and doing things again. I mean, you won't have all the time in the world in such a fast format, but this is value that can be relevant starting on turn 3 if you trade off a bestow creature on turn 2. Last but definitely not least is Grave Robber Spider. Now this is a giant spider, 4 mana, 2/4 reach, so I'm not unhappy to just have this in my deck, period, in my non-black decks. Now, once you start having access to 3 colorless and a black, you can make this into an absolute monster, and that makes blocking and attacking really, really difficult for your opponent. In black and green, there is multiple ways to get creatures into your graveyard, well, in the non-natural way. So I think this is definitely one of the strongest cards out of the 10, and it doesn't have the disadvantage that you're committing to 2 colors immediately. Green is the color that has the least trouble producing a black mana if needed, even if you aren't playing black, and it's probably the most solid creature of all on its own. 4 mana, 2/4 reach, blocking pretty much all the flyers, all the common flyers in the format. So Grave Robber Spider, yeah, is already a high pick for me just from looking at these cards in comparison. So we see that the difficult decisions that gold and multicolored cards with off-color activated abilities present to us continue being relevant in Born of the Gods. However, it's a bit toned down. There aren't that many cards to worry about. There is no common cycle that forces you to make these decisions, but it's limited to these 10 uncommons and the 5 gods, the mythic rare gods, which effectively means that you have to be very certain how good all of these cards are before making your decision or to aid your decision process. It really comes down to the question, how good is Reap What Is Sown compared to other white cards, compared to other green cards, compared to other single colored cards. And once you or I or we have answered these questions, then unraveling the mysteries of Born of the Gods drafting is going to be a lot simpler, because we don't have to worry about this whole risk-reward spectrum too much, and we can just say, for example, Reap What Is Sown is so good, we'll definitely risk not being able to play it because it's too colored. Or we might say, I've tried Siren of the Silent Song, it's alright, but I would much rather start off with blue card X or black card Y for these reasons. Alright, enough talking, time to draft. This was my take on multicolored cards in Theros and Born of the Gods. I'll be back, hopefully, with some Born of the Gods action. See you next time.